Welcome back to season 5 of Time to Change. I'm Chasen Forehand.
And I'm Dom Jones. We have some amazing conversations lined up from people doing the work. I'm excited for those and the change that it'll hopefully spark.
I can't wait to jump in. So let's get started. Welcome to Time to Change. Today I have my co-host Dom Jones in the house, the Talent and Leadership Advisor. He is got the Let Go plan, and we have talked about that. You'll have to go watch the video if you haven't seen it. But today, Sharon Birn is in the house. She's a life and wellness coach. She has over 20 years of working not only with on the employer side, but with the employees themselves in and around things to help those that have handicaps and disabilities with finding jobs, getting through biases. She is on the advisory board for HR for You Incorporated. Thank you so much. She is also one of our newer partners. And we're going to talk today, about the ADA, since it just happened, recently it had its birthday. And we want to talk about really, how well is that working? And for those of you that don't know, Sharon is in a wheelchair. My wife walks with a permanent cane. And there are definitely biases that you see and that you feel when you're in the workplace. So, Dom, we'll give it over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like I just pulled up to the cool kids table with this conversation and you, Chasen and Sharon. I would love, Sharon, maybe as a great place to start. This is one of those topics where until you need to know about it, you kind of don't know a lot about it. And so perhaps as a starting point, from your perspective in the work that you do, why is this conversation important in general, but also meaningful to you in the work that you do?
Okay, so this conversation is important because accommodations are meant to level the playing field. And by that, I mean they're meant to enable a qualified candidate to be able to do their job effectively around, for lack of a better word, because I don't like this word, but for lack of a better word, around a deficit. Like myself, I use a wheelchair, plus my disability has hidden aspects to it that required me to have different accommodations. But if I don't have the accommodations, then I can't do my job effectively. So if somebody doesn't have a desk that's wide enough for me to get underneath with my wheelchair, I'm not going to have a workspace. So that's just one example. So you want your employees to be able to do their job effectively, and you want to be able to have qualified candidates. And just because somebody has a disability doesn't make them unqualified. They just need to be accommodated in order to be able to do the job effectively. And the second part of your question was, why don't we have this conversation? Or, I'm
Why is
sorry.
it personally meaningful for you?
It's personally meaningful to me, really for many reasons, but two are for what I just said, that I am a qualified candidate for jobs and I have many assets that I can bring to jobs. And if you accommodate me around some of the, for lack of a better word, issues that I have that I can't control, but if you accommodate those things go into the background, and then I can just be the asset to the team that I can be. And the other reason why it's important to me is because people with disabilities are a very untapped resource in the job market. There's many of us out there with varying disabilities who want to work and would be loyal employees, but they're sitting home collecting disability, not because they want to, but because nobody's giving them the opportunity to be a productive member of society in the workforce.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also important to me along those lines, for the simple reason that what do you do when you get out of school? We go to work and we be as independent as we can, and we work to support ourselves. So if people aren't accommodated, then how are we supposed to be able to support ourselves? And how are we supposed to be able to be productive members of society?
Yeah, we end up siloing people with disabilities, especially those that have very visible and seen disabilities, because our brains are known to compare and contrast, but some people have taken that to contrasting and judging and creating biases to where, like, I see someone that is on crutches or that walks with a cane or that is in a wheelchair, and I naturally assume that they cannot do the work productively. I associate that with a lack of speed and productivity. And that's just not the case. That's just not the case. So have you, I mean, I know part of your story, and we've talked about this last time with Jake Rooms, who has a lot of unseen disabilities on autism spectrum and other things that he has going on with him, that he has to have a certain level of noise sensitivity and light and et cetera. So how, in your case, one of the things that we wanted to talk about was, where you were promised accommodations and now you're in the space, you've been offered the job, you got through the process. There was accessibility in that hiring process. You were hired and you were promised accommodations, but you don't receive them. In your opinion, how often does that happen? And the second part of that is, what do you do?
If I'm being transparent, it happens a lot. It happens more often than people are willing to talk about, because people are so excited that they've gotten a job. They don't want to mar their name or bring up a discrimination issue, because that's really what it becomes at that point, in fear of retribution and being terminated. So it happens more than people are willing to talk about. When I haven't gotten accommodations that I have been promised, and that has happened many times to myself, I bring it up to my supervisors. I've gone to HR, and I'm not going to say that it's always been dealt with appropriately or kindly, or that I haven't experienced retribution. I won't ever come on a platform and malign somebody or an institution, but I will not speak the truth. And the truth is that there was retribution for me bringing it up. There was, disdain and negativity towards me for bringing it up. But it happens, like I said, it happens on the daily, Jason, when somebody's, what do you mean that we promised you that accommodation? Well, I would have never taken this job if you couldn't accommodate this piece of this job, because I can't do it without the accommodation. So, why are we here? And then it really becomes a battle of he said, she said a lot of the time. And it's really an unfortunate place for the employee to be, because like I said, there is a lot of negativity around that. But I encourage people, if you are entitled to an accommodation and they've agreed to the accommodation, then you do have to and they're putting you in a position where you have to push for it, then push for it. But I will say this, I have also told people with disabilities who are getting accommodations, you can't ask, you don't always have the right to ask for the golden egg from the goose. If they're willing to accommodate you with a dictation system, there's many out there. And there's a lot of people that want drag and dictate, but employers don't want to put in drag and dictate because it's expensive. But if your employer is willing to get the Google version of a dictation, which is voice in, which is less money yearly than Dragon, then they're still providing you with the appropriate accommodation. So you don't have, I just had this with a client. They were like, no, but I want Dragon. And I'm like, stop. Because you're making a bad name for people like you and me. Stop. You're getting the accommodation. So it works from both sides, you know?
Yeah. Sharon, I think what you just spoke to aligns with much of the language within the ADA is around this thought of reasonable, quote unquote, accommodation.
Hmm.
And what I have found in the workplace is that there's a lot of gray area around that. In the work that you do, how do you counsel people and how to weigh through what is reasonable versus what is not?
It's a really, uh, it's really difficult. It's a fine line between what is reasonable and what is not, um, because accommodations can be expensive. They really can be. Is that fair? No, I don't. I think that assistive technology companies and wheelchair companies, they know they have you by the ropes. They know you need this, so
Mm-hmm.
they inflate the price because they know you can't say no.
Mm-hmm.
And so that I do feel for employers who have to spend an exorbitant amount of money to reasonably accommodate because people are inflating prices. On the flip side of that, though, because there's always two sides, is um, that's why I work with my clients or other people to say if there is a cheaper cost version, then do that. And so the language of the ADA did the best that it could for the time that it was written and by whom it was written.
Mm-hmm.
But there are so many idiosyncrasies in every category of disability. Like, for instance, I have CP. There's a large continuum of how CP can affect an individual. There's a large continuum of how brain injury, traumatic brain injuries affect individuals, strokes, and all those kind of things that would fall under that. So you can't to say that a reasonable accommodation for one person with cerebral palsy or a traumatic brain injury will be the same reasonable accommodation will work for somebody else. That's not true. What's reasonable for one may not be reasonable for the other. And so I do believe that you have to take it on a case by case basis, individual basis. You can't assume that if you have two employees with similar disabilities or even the same diagnosis, that the accommodations they're going to need are going to be the same, because it won't be. So reasonable has to be as individualized as the individuals that you're hiring is how and it's not an easy task. It's not, language only allows us to communicate so much. But
Yeah,
I have seen employers really rest on the language and say, nope, no, nope. The law says exactly this, so we
Mm-hmm.
can get away with not. And
Sure.
so it's really we really need to change the language or make sure that we make, um, have additional add-ins for specific situations.
absolutely. Great segment today by co-host Dom Jones in the house, Sharon Birn, stepping in to let us know a little bit more about her thoughts on the ADA and where we need to go in the future. This has been Time to Change. Thank you so much for being part of our journey. We'll catch you next time.